A random bird timed its bombing run so perfectly that its poo hit the sensor for the automatic braking and the car just jumped on the anchors. I don't know why they did it. Physical knobs. Knobs are better. Just go back to buttons and knobs.
Now, I've gone on record and said publicly that I would 100% buy a Tiguan R because mechanically they're actually pretty good. But as for the rest of the lineup, I absolutely would not buy one. And I'll tell you why.
This might be one of the all-time great sleepers out there. Do you want the ultimate have your cake and eat it too used SUV that money can buy? The Tiguan might be it. All the cool and sophisticated European car vibes, it won loads of Car of the Year awards when new, and on the used market, it's available across a great range of models and prices. And for models wearing this R badge, it is seriously rapid, although it's also wearing this badge. And this can mean a host of common issues, many of which can be extremely expensive to repair. So, shall we find out if a used Tiguan is a safe bet or a potential disaster that you need to avoid? Let's start with what goes wrong with them. Blowing issues can always be quite disappointing, and for many Tiguan owners, the HVAC system can just become bloody annoying. Certain fan speeds or certain temperature settings just won't work, or maybe there can be some clunking and weird noises coming from the entire system when you change settings. Now, sometimes this can be a really easy fix, like a software update, but other times it can require taking the entire dashboard out of the car to sort it out, and that's going to cost thousands. Plus, on post-update models like this one, Volkswagen swapped out quite a few of the HVAC's physical knobs and buttons for a touch control style setup. And some owners love this, others despise it. For me though, it's just not that intuitive to use. Also, you've got to take your eyes off the road for too long to work out what you're actually touching and sliding. I don't know why they did it. Physical knobs. Knobs are better. Just go back to buttons and knobs, which they are. Actually, just on the buttons and knobs in here, just try everything. Make sure every single one of them works, because owners have had some problems with the resilience. Also, some of the coding on some of the earlier models, it's coming off already. Now, the potential good news with some of these button issues is that just replacing a button, super simple, not expensive to do. However, you might run into the issue where you replace the button, but then the problem that is behind the button keeps occurring. That might mean it's a bigger electrical issue, and we're gonna open that can of worms really soon. But the button pressing test has to be done on the steering wheel, because owners have reported everything from certain buttons and functions not working, sometimes the horn doesn't work, or you might get an airbag warning light on the dash. Now, chances are this is just the electrical connector playing up. That's not a hard fix, but it might be a bigger issue. Hopefully it's not. Also, the haptic feedback buttons on these post-update cars, this is another love or hate scenario here. I think it's more hate than love, because Volkswagen are going back to physical buttons. I also can't stand these. I've got quite large hands, and I've noticed when I'm driving, this section of my hand when turning just starts selecting certain things randomly. Bloody annoying. And this love-hate relationship can extend to the car's safety features. Owners love the fact that these are filled to the brim with all sorts of active safety tech, but then, like so many modern cars, there are many complaints about incessant beeps and bongs and just alerts going off all the time. Also, owners have mentioned that the automatic braking can just jump on the anchors if the car detects the slightest incline, or the adaptive cruise control just fails to work. Now, before you think that this is an electrical issue or just a calibration problem, how dirty is the car? See, for these safety systems to work, these things are loaded with various sensors. But if they're all covered in dirt and shit, well, they're not going to work properly, are they? In fact, one owner of a 2016 model told us that a random bird timed its bombing run so perfectly that its poo hit the sensor for the automatic braking and the car just jumped on the anchors. Yes, hilarious, but could have been disastrous if he was being tailgated by a Ford Ranger, because that's what Ford Rangers do. But these sensor issues can also extend to the sensors under here for the powered opening tailgate and the parking sensors. If your foot isn't being detected by the tailgate, or the parking sensors aren't detecting objects, or maybe they're phantom detecting, like they sense that there's something there when physically there is actually nothing there, maybe you just need to clean the sensors. Or maybe the module needs to be reset. Or maybe it's a larger issue with the wiring loom, because this can be an issue as well. Annoyingly, if it is a wiring loom or a larger electrical issue with the car, and you're not a fan of DIY projects and the car isn't covered by a new car warranty, things can get very expensive to repair very quickly. Actually, just on the whole warranty thing as well, we did notice that across subreddits and forums and owners groups, there are a lot of people on there saying that if the car doesn't have a new car warranty, a used car warranty is an absolute must if you're buying a used example. We're not so sure about that. Read the fine print, because quite often these used car warranties are not worth the paper they're written on. But look, let's get into these pesky electronic issues in here, because there are so many reports of so many things going wrong. I said it before, try every button and function, but not only that, just try every actual function like rain sensing wipers and everything. Make sure it actually works correctly. But specifically, check the power windows and power mirrors. Do they work? Try the push button start as well. Is it delayed in starting the car? It shouldn't be. Also, all of the lighting, both inside and out, does it actually work correctly? Does the fuel flap open and close correctly, because the actuator can have some issues? And does the central locking lock and unlock when you ask it? But impossibly good news, if any of these things are playing up, quite often a simple software update can solve it. However, some of the techs we spoke to mentioned that they've had to do software updates multiple times, because the problem is they'll do a software update that fixes one problem, but then it sort of goes and creates a whole other problem, so they just end up chasing their tail over and over again. Or maybe these electrical issues are down to some water leakage issues, because that can be a thing, especially if it has a sunroof. Look, like any car with a sunroof, if the thing is garaged all the time and the sunroof is cleaned properly, you are less likely to have any issues. However, like so many Volkswagens that we have featured, it seems like the drainage channels are almost enthusiastic to clog up with crap. It's so annoying. Not only that, even if you do clean them all the time, sometimes as the cars age, the rubber and plastic tubing that kind of drains water away, they can become brittle and crack, and that lets water leak in. And apparently on some of the earlier models, the drainage tubes can sort of pinch shut all by themselves. All of these things can lead to water leaking into the car, and trust us, you do not want that to happen. Plus, if routine maintenance hasn't been a priority for the previous owner, well, they can then have mechanism issues and the entire thing can just rattle. As are the B pillars and the A pillars and the door cards and the dash. Now, these rattles and weird noise issues, they do tend to be more prevalent on the early Tiguans. Apparently Volkswagen has fixed this up with later models, although maybe they just haven't had time to develop their rattles just yet. Also, another thing on weird noises, look, it's great that these cars offer a really premium feel to how they drive. Even the early base models are an absolute pleasure from behind the wheel. However, some of the bushes can be a bit on the soft side to give you this sense of a premium drive, but then they wear prematurely, and that can be a bit of a problem. And the same can be said for the brakes. And look, obviously this is going to vary depending on how you drive, but plenty of owners have complained of premature brake wear, especially on these R models. But when it comes to replacing these brakes or even the suspension components, hot tip from the owners here, do your homework when it comes to aftermarket parts, because quite often quality aftermarket parts can last longer, outperform and cost less than the Volkswagen OEM components. The wiper blades, for example, we use Wipertech blades for this exact reason. And when you order yourself a set via the link below, you're going to get 15% off and free express shipping. Unless that is you do what Andrew has done and lend us your car to feature, because then we're going to give you a set for free as a thank you present. If you'd like to volunteer your car, email me via the link below. Also, aside from the fact that the Volkswagen OEM blades can cost a bloody fortune, owners have complained that they can shudder and carry on and they don't wipe water very well, and they just don't last very long. And the same can be said for the interior. There are plenty of owners that have complained that the interior resilience just isn't what it should be for a family car. And look, it's fantastic that design-wise, this is really, really nice. Okay, it might be a little too conservative for some people out there, but also there's just some disappointing things in terms of materials used. I thought would feel more premium here. For example, the texture here is actually quite nice on the plastic, but then on the doors, that just looks cheap and nasty. Some of the fabrics as well, this has the leather interior, and it just, I don't know, it doesn't feel quite as nice as I think it should. And then some owners have complained that the tops of the doors over time just start to squeak when you lean your arm on it. And then other owners that have had the fabric interiors, they've complained that the fabric can get a bit loose and it ages really quickly, gets dirty very, very fast. But then with the leather interiors, like in this car, apparently some of the leather can get quite loose prematurely. Even in new ones, this is pretty new, but even that back seat, the leather just looks a little bit overly wrinkly. And over time, even if you look after the leather, it can get really shiny pretty quickly. Plus, there are reports that the steering wheel leather can fade at as little as 30,000 kilometers. Granted, this might be down to whatever hand cream those owners are using. That can make it fade and start to deteriorate and get dirty too fast. Although in saying that, why didn't Volkswagen just use a leather that's more resilient to normal everyday use? Look, basically with any of the leather in these things, it just has to be maintained to fastidious levels to retain its best qualities. And then when it comes to the other elements of the interior trim, plenty of owners have complained that certain plastic things can become a bit loose over time, or they just become brittle with age. And anything that's gloss black plastic in these things, like any car, it can get dirty near instantly, and it can scratch faster than DJ Jazzy Jeff. Also, while the seats across most of the range are super comfortable, really nice driving position, great levels of adjustment, in the R models, quite a few owners are a bit disappointed with the seats. Like, why couldn't Volkswagen fit exactly the same seats that come in the Golf R to these? I tend to agree. In some markets, you can get optional sort of more Recaro style looking seats, but as these ones, they're okay, but I just don't think they deserve the R badge. They're not quite as supportive or as aggressive as they should be. Even when it comes to some of the exterior trim, owners have complained about certain plastic components sort of coming loose, sometimes even coming off, and even sort of the chrome trim or bits and pieces can fade and oxidize and discolor. In fact, quite a few owners claim that compared to other Volkswagens that they've owned previously, these things don't exhibit maybe the same level of build quality as Volkswagen used to offer, especially for the earlier models and the models made during COVID. Actually, when we read through the owners groups and forums and spoke to the techs that work on these, many people recommended to avoid any Tiguan built between 2020 and 2022. Apparently they can be guilty of more build quality issues, more electrical gremlins, and sometimes they can have less features as well. Although, compared to say some of the Tiguan alternatives like the Hyundai Tucson or the Kia Sportage, Mazda CX-5 and Toyota RAV4, features that are standard on the lower spec examples of those sometimes are only available in the higher spec models of Tiguan or as part of an option pack. And look, we're not saying that these things lack in standard kit at all. Even the early base model ones come with all the normal accoutrement that you'd expect. But even I think normal things like multi-zone climate control and heated seats, for that you're going to have to hunt higher up the food chain or find a heavily optioned model. However, and this really shits me, some of these features that are only available as optional extras are actually physically already in the car. They just require a software update to unlock them. But do your homework here, because there are third-party providers out there that can unlock these features for way less than what Volkswagen will try to charge you. Actually, you know what? The infotainment systems, they are a classic for this sort of stuff. Also, the infotainment systems, they can all come with quite a few complaints. But look, no matter which iteration of these, personally, I think they're all quite good to use. Nowhere near as good as, say, BMW's iDrive system. That is sort of the class leader. But when these are at their best, they're relatively intuitive to use. Although these touchscreen only models, because of the no knobs, they frustrate me. There's a reason that Volkswagen are going back to knobs and physical controls. But look, no matter which iteration of these, there are plenty of complaints about Apple CarPlay, Android Auto and Bluetooth dropping out, or the entire system just being really, really slow to boot up, or sometimes it will just restart itself randomly, or the actual operation can just feel like it takes forever, just slow to respond. And the native sat-nav on all of them is utterly rubbish. Although in saying that, does anyone out there actually use like car infotainment native sat-nav anymore? Surely not, right? But in what could be good news, a lot of these infotainment system issues can generally be really easily fixed with a simple software update, although sometimes it can be a hardware issue. For example, we actually shot a Tiguan ages ago. It was actually one of the first videos we ever made. It was one of my best mate's cars. And in that car, even on the day we filmed it, the infotainment system, it wouldn't connect properly. It was having all sorts of issues. He actually had it replaced from Volkswagen under warranty. But the problem was, all of the issues just came back again, and they replaced it again, and then the issues all came back again. Also, the sound systems in these, including the higher spec optional systems like this Harman Kardon system or the Fender systems that are in the US, maybe the sound quality isn't quite as good as you're anticipating, but the good news here, it's super easy to improve that. You can just fit an amplifier or a sub. Actually, we've made a full video guide to improving your car entertainment experience with our mates from Automotive Superstore. Check the video out, it'll answer all your questions. The link is down below. Also, for all of those aftermarket parts that we mentioned before, plus whatever accessories you need, check out our mates at Automotive Superstore, because chances are whatever you need, they're gonna have it. Plus they ship Australia-wide for ultimate convenience. Speaking of convenience, what are these like to live with? Well, in terms of space in the boot, which you can open with your foot from the sensors. Anyway, in the boot, this actually has one of the larger cargo areas for this category of car, plus the seats fold. Oops. That's interesting. The seats fold flat and they can sort of kind of be folded from these little levers that sometimes don't work. Now, the Tiguan is also available as the 7-seat all space. That's a lie. It should be called the Tiguan some space because the third row is really only for the smallest of toddlers or Yuki Tsunoda. Also, with the third row up, it does limit boot space, although with the third row down, it does offer an excellent amount of cargo area. Then in the back seat, I'm exactly 27 centimeters taller than Mr. Tsunoda. This is in my driving position, and look, space-wise, fantastic. Heaps of knee room, loads of foot room, good sized windows. And then because of the panoramic roof, it just feels spacious and airy in here. If I was a kid, I would not feel claustrophobic at all. However, there are negatives. These rear seats, zero support at all. Like, you're gonna slide around all over the place back here, and they're extremely firm. I feel like I'm almost sitting on a park bench rather than in the back of a car, especially one that's supposed to be a bit more premium. And again, like the front, just way more hard, scratchy plastics than you're anticipating. And yeah, look, this is probably good for resilience with kids and whatnot, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel as premium as I'd hoped. And then as far as features and practicality, air vents, stupid no button climate control again, USB-C port, which is great, power outlet there, pockets here, pull down armrest obviously with 2.5 cup holders, 0.5 for one of my small pretentious coffees like a double ristretto with a dash of oat milk, excellent sized door bins that are felt lined, and that's about it for features and practicality back here. And then as far as spaces for all of your crap, you've got a pretty decent sized glove box. There's a spot perfectly sized for your phone just there. Little storage net down here, cubby bin under here, excellent sized door bins, and they are felt lined to keep your cold drinks nice and warm. More storage here. Some models have storage under the seats and a sunglasses holder, not in this one. Then we need to talk about the cup holders. Look, super funky that they kind of pop out like that. The problem is, over time, this whole thing can start to fail. Now, for me and my small pretentious coffees, not a big deal because they have a low center of gravity. Even when these don't work, they don't kind of fall all over the place. But if you've got a large drink, especially if it's like a sugar-based drink, and it topples over and just spills all your crap in there, that can be a nightmare. And this is then obviously made so much worse if the car's like bucking and lurching all over the place due to the car's DSG transmission issues. This is easily one of the Tiguan's biggest complaints, and Jim, our resident mechanic, will elaborate more on it shortly, but owners have complained that gear changes can feel like you're being rear-ended by a truck, or worst case scenario, the car just leaves you completely stranded with no drive because the whole thing fails. And then even when it is working perfectly, it does all the typical DSG things, meaning it's really grumpy at around town speeds, and then like even if you see a gap in traffic and you floor it, it takes forever to actually find the gear to get you moving as quick as you should. You know what? It's almost CVT levels of sluggish. Plus, this delay in the R is almost amplified because when it does finally get into a gear, boost is built and it just fires you forward at the future at an alarming rate. Suddenly, the premature brake wear in these makes sense because these things pick up pace at an incredible rate. You are into lose your license territories almost instantly. So you end up being on the brakes more than you are the throttle. And with over 1,700 kilos to deal with, stopping one of these is no small task. Still, this might be one of the all-time great sleepers out there. What I mean is that this looks like a very nice family-friendly SUV, but it goes like a BMW M5 or a Nissan GTR. In fact, it is quicker than an E39 M5 or an R34 GTR when we're talking 0 to 100 times. And it's not just straight line speed either. This thing, it bends the laws of physics. Corner speed is insane, especially for a vehicle like this. And I think that's why it is fun. It's not fun in the traditional sense like a Mazda MX-5, like a proper performance car. But you just drive one of these going, this should not be able to pull the shapes and do the dynamic things that it can do. It's nuts, and that makes it hilarious. The problem is, even a 162 TSI will bend the laws of physics more than any normal human would ever need in the real world. So you kind of question why you need the R at all. But look, across the entire range of Tiguan, they are so nice to drive. They're easy to live with, they're easy to park. They just do daily duties so well. Although that's almost one of the problems. They're kind of all a bit vanilla. They don't feel like, these things have always been targeted as being a slightly more premium SUV here in Australia, and I just don't know if they ever actually offer a premium driving experience. They're nice, but they're just not, they're nothing special. I mean, go and drive a Hyundai Tucson or a Kia Sportage, and I honestly think some of those can feel more premium than the entire Tiguan range. So overall driving experience, it can be a bit hit or miss. Some things are great, some things aren't so great. Could the same be said about the mechanical packages and their reliability? I can't tell you about that because I'm not a qualified mechanic, but Jim is.
The 1.4, look, not a bad thing. They do suffer from water pump leaks like every other Volkswagen. The good news here is they are actually relatively affordable and quite accessible, so the cost of renewing it isn't too bad. They do have some turbo-related issues. They can have an issue where the wastegate rod rattles, and they can also have some actuator issues too, which can cause some boost abnormalities. Not too difficult to fix usually. Occasionally they have some coil pack issues, which can just cause a misfire. They can occasionally have some PCV complications that can cause some air-fuel ratio fault codes and can also cause like a weird sucking noise, not too hard to fix. And that can also exacerbate the oil consumption issues, which they are known for. So be prepared to top up the oil occasionally. Other than that, they're actually not too bad. Now the 2-litre, look, these are very much improved over previous generations. In fact, the newer the Tiguan, basically the more reliable it's going to be. The oil consumption issues and the timing chain complications are far less common than previous generations, but they do still have the ever-present water pump complication. That is an expensive pump, so be prepared to do that from 60,000 Ks. You can expect that to leak. And as per usual, I would insist on getting an aftermarket pump. They're cheaper and often better too. And you should hit up our mates at Automotive Superstore. They can hook you up with one of them. Very good. Some reports of premature turbo wear. Now that can actually be linked to units that are poorly serviced. So as always, you need to service these on time every time, or better yet, ahead of schedule. They can have some complications with the variable camshaft solenoid, not terribly common and actually not too hard to fix too, but yeah, just keep an eye out for that. They still can have some issues with the swirl flap in the manifold and the swirl flap actuator and the position sensor. If you're going to do the water pump that I mentioned earlier, you'll have that manifold off anyway, so that's a good chance to check all of that, and you can renew that at the same time if your budget goes that far. But I should mention that problems with that manifold typically only occur after much higher mileage, say from 120 upwards. Now the 2-litre diesel, actually generally a pretty solid unit. They can have some complications with their EGR valves. You'll always get a warning light when that's the case. Now the DPF can be problematic as well, but often that's a result of an issue with the AdBlue system or the NOx sensor, or sometimes it's a clogged up map sensor, or sometimes it's a boost leak, or any combination of those. Pro tip, if you're having any DPF issues, just make sure all of those things are thoroughly checked before you condemn the DPF, because the DPFs are bloody expensive. Now the water pump in these can be problematic, and it's not because of leaks like every other Volkswagen. It's actually an electronic problem. They have a clutch in there, and sometimes that clutch doesn't disengage properly or engage properly, and sometimes that can cause overheating issues. Now another issue that can cause overheating problems is loss of coolant. Now these are known for coolant leaks from the heat exchanger. Now that heat exchanger is part of the inlet manifold, and that can leak internally, and in some cases if it leaks badly enough, it can cause a hydro lock in the engine, which can cause catastrophic engine failure. And now another cause of coolant leaks is from the EGR cooler. Now on these, if you're seeing any coolant loss whatsoever and there's no external leaks that are visible, you need to check the EGR cooler and the heat exchanger in the manifold, because it will be one of those, because they're both known issues. Now the transmissions, the DSGs in these, look, they actually have improved a lot over the years and become more reliable. But in these, it is still the most commonly reported fault that they have. They can have issues with the mechatronics unit. Now, typically that just causes a shifting issue, or more, I should say, lack of shifting issue. They can also have clutch position faults as well, and some clutch wear abnormalities, which can make them even jerkier when you take off. They can also have some dual mass flywheel complications. Typically, you'll just hear a horrible rattle when it's sitting there idling. Now, Volkswagen have done a bunch of transmission control unit updates on these, so it's definitely worthwhile getting those checked when it's at the dealership. The DSGs, you should service them every 60,000 kilometres, which will definitely lessen the chances of it having a complication, but it definitely won't guarantee you won't have an issue. Now the warranty, now some of these have new car warranty still. In fact, units sold after January in 2019 have a 5-year warranty. Now just keep in mind, those warranties won't last forever, and neither will the DSG transmissions. So if you have one or thinking of getting one, make sure you maybe have a little bit of money set aside for a bit of a contingency should you have complications.
Now look, let's get something straight, okay? Like all of our reviews, we generally do focus on the common issues. So it's understandable that by now in the video, you're probably thinking, there's no way in hell I would buy one of these cars, okay? But the truth is, most Tiguan owners have never and likely will never experience a major problem. Many even say it's easily the best car they've ever owned. And especially in this R form, for the $45,000 to $70,000 that they ask on the used market, there are very few other vehicles that can offer this level of performance and practicality. If you can afford both the purchase and the upkeep, and it has a meticulous service history plus passes a pre-purchase inspection, we'd absolutely recommend buying a used R. That said, across the rest of the Tiguan range, it seems that for every extremely happy owner, there's another very disgruntled one. Even the Tiguan that we originally filmed developed so many ongoing issues that my mate that owned it swore he would never buy another Volkswagen ever again. Another owner said that his Tiguan became so costly to repair that it made more sense to dismantle and sell it for parts. So when it comes to the older, higher kilometre Tiguans out there, they range from sort of $8,000 to about $25,000. Nah, we just don't think they're worth the risk. There are better cars out there for that kind of budget. And okay, look, sure, a CX-5 or a RAV4 or a Honda CR-V or a Tucson or a Sportage, they might lack some of the European vibe, but realistically, if you're in the market for a family-friendly SUV, surely reliability, depreciation, the cost of repairs and maintenance are going to be the highest things on the priority list. A well-used Tiguan is simply not a standout in these departments. And if we're talking north of $25,000, look, if you can afford the upkeep and the maintenance and the depreciation, they do start to make a bit more sense. But you know what? Even then, we think it needs to be an R or at least a heavily optioned, higher spec, more recent example to warrant the risk. Or you could just buy one of these instead. The wiper blades, for example.
And sometimes that clutch doesn't disengage properly or engage properly, and
yet according to many Tiguan owners, the issues are always quite disappointing, and for many Tiguan owners, what's going on?